I think, as you know, sort of some languages go from the right to left, some left to right. In that sort of sense, I'm going to kind of start from the back and come forward. Just before I start this presentation, just sort of some thanks, first and foremost to Alzheimer's Europe and Diane, John, for including me in some of this work, and I'll kind of mention the document at the end where it's available from as well. So this intercultural care work, absolutely vital, and vital for all of us, not just across Europe, but across the world, really. And also a thank you to University of Bradford, where I'm a PhD student in the Doctoral Training Centre, again kindly supported by the Alzheimer's Society in England. So what I wanted to do is, as I said, that kind of starts from the back to come forward. So I've asked a friend who's a psychiatrist, is a doctor in London, also a Twitter friend. He posted something yesterday, which I've asked him whether I could just read that before I start my presentation, which kind of summarises, so it's a conclusion really before I start the presentation. So two posts really, and I want you to sort of think about particularly the second one. So it says, my first full-time job was stacking shelves in the food department at Marks and Spencer's. I was 17 years old and had just left my family behind in Lebanon. Today is my first shift as the on-call psychiatrist doctor at St Thomas's Hospital in London. And he goes on to sort of say that lived experience is so underrated. I understand that knowledge can be acquired through scholarship and novel data can be generated through research. But nothing can replace the insights gained through lived experience. Experts by experience should be given the respect they deserve. And I think for me that kind of summarises some of the issues that I'm going to kind of raise in this presentation, that, you know, let's not forget who is it that we're actually all here for and what we're trying to do. Okay, so I was questioning this fact that on the one hand, you know, I'm a student of knowledge and learning, so I'm here to learn from experts. But then on the other hand, I keep being told that I'm an expert in this field. So sometimes, you know, I'd like to think that I like to remain in the middle, that we're always learning, always here to learn off other people. But also it's important that what we do know that we're able to share. So I'm going to take you through a bit of a whistle-stop tour about intercultural care and the importance of this and why we need to be very mindful. There is a lot of data on there, and I apologise for that, but part of the idea was that at least people can access some information and conversations can be continued afterwards if need be. So who is it that we're talking about? Last year I asked this question, because we were at, I don't know, some colleagues might remember, in Barcelona, that why is it that some communities are called migrants or immigrants and others are called expats? And the reason why I raise that is that it creates this narrative of the other. So who is this other? So when we talk about migrants, we talk about communities of difference, we talk about you know, people who may be different to us. It almost creates this notion that it has to be something special, you know, it has to be something that's separate, and I do beg to differ. My other point really at the bottom of this slide is that it's not just about, and often we see this as people who may be of a different skin colour, but what about communities within Europe as we move between one country and another, and our languages and our cultures. And again, I think it's important to remind us that, you know, if we talk about, I don't know, calling the English French, calling French Spanish, Spanish German, you know, we wouldn't be happy with that. So how come we can put the whole of Africa together, we can put the whole of South Asia together, Africa and, you know, and Caribbean together, and somehow assume that their culture is very similar? So there's lots that is common amongst communities, but there's lots that's different as well. So just some kind of facts really to try and give a little bit of importance why this is important. I think I might have jumped something. No, it's right. I'm not going to kind of read through this slide here, but it's important to remind us that you know, the numbers are growing, minority communities that came as migrant labour in many of the countries. As those communities are ageing, they will have their health needs. But two things there that might be quite pertinent are, one, around communities not always being aware of services, how we access those, how do we access information, and of course it's information that allows us to have informed choices. But then also on the other hand, how much do service providers, commissioners, how much do they know about these communities and what they need and how they would access those services? But research, as well as lived experience, also tells us that some of these communities are absent at the point of care. Their voice is often missing in research. They present late, and that's usually a crisis. So why is that? And if they're already managing complex care needs or complex health, where does dementia fit into this? And certainly a conversation I'd had with one of our GPs was that, his view was that people with dementia tend to be in nursing homes. Why? Because in that locality, they were dealing with coronary heart disease and diabetes. So something about priorities there as well. So what is intercultural care? And I am going to read this. So it's the acceptance and promotion of cultural diversity reflected in a way that people interact, understand, and relate to each other, and through policies and practice which help ensure equal opportunities, respect, and fair treatment of people from all ethnic groups. And it's important that we talk about all ethnic groups, because if there is an ethnic minority, of course, there's also an ethnic majority. So why is it important? Well, I've talked about the fact that there's population demographics in terms of the population that's changing. We know that numbers themselves are increasing. If we're talking about 20 to 25,000 people BME background in the UK living with dementia, there's an expected 7 to 8-fold increase. So if we don't do something about that, what's going to happen when these families, communities hit crisis? There's also a global increase in kind of creating awareness. So what does that do? Well, more and more people are going to come forward for services. More and more people are going to want to access help. But it will also place pressures on systems and services. So we need to be mindful from that perspective as well. I think it's also important to kind of remember that we don't live with one label. And I was trying to kind of capture this, and I think my next slide will help focus on that, in that we will often think that certain communities can fit into certain boxes, and therefore if we have certain actions or behaviours towards those communities that we'll be able to help them. But I'd beg to differ, because there's also communities within communities, and I've kind of alluded to that fact when I said we can often put the whole of Africa and the Caribbean together, but we'd never say, well, all Europeans want X, Y, Z. And often, which unfortunately we're still here, and was a government minister that said this just like 2 years back, that we British should be learning from the minority communities. Why? Because they tend to look after their own. And I think I've spent about 20 years trying to bust that myth that actually we don't look after our own. And I'll hopefully go on a little bit to sort of say why that might be. Now, this doesn't capture the whole essence of what is South Asian in the UK, but it gives a bit of a flavour, because of course the Nepalese are missing, Sri Lankans are missing, Jains, Buddhists are missing, lots of other languages are not on there. So if we were to provide information and services, and we say we're doing this for the South Asian community, what might we do? So I thought I'd try and break this down for you. If you're Pakistani, and this is, as I said, the kind of communities that I work with back in the UK, they might be Muslim or Christian. But of course, there are Pakistani, Sikhs and Hindus, but not necessarily the communities that I've worked with. It gives you an idea of what languages that they might speak. Then we add the Kashmiri community, not too dissimilar. And then we're adding the Bangladeshi community to that. Some commonalities, because all three of these communities so far tend to be Muslim. Urdu tends to be more of a universal language. And then we add the Indian community. Lots more arrows there now. But if we'd add the Buddhists, if we'd added the Jain community, if we'd added Nepalese, Sri Lankans, hopefully it gives you an idea of how complicated it becomes in one generalised community, yet alone looking at many of the others. Migratory influence is very important, really, and I kind of have a slide on that in a second. I think one of them just jumped on here. Thank you. There are lots of complications here, and my own PhD I'm trying to kind of move things forward, which are looking at things like generational difference, gender difference. But of course, lots of minority communities tend to have socioeconomic deprivation, which will add to health inequalities already before we move on to things. But there's also some area here which is looking at how do communities, so when I talked about lived experience and knowledge and where do we get knowledge from, is that let's look at what works for these communities. So if they are faith-based communities, which a lot of minority communities tend to be, then let's look at what might work for them. And this is Vanessa Lawrence's work when she talks about traditional and non-traditional aspects of caring. For some people, it is burdensome. For some people, actually, it's virtuous. For some people, particularly the younger generations, it's actually we want to live more of a nuclear, family lifestyle. We've got careers and jobs, we've got young families. And yet we have the others that sort of say, well, actually, do you know what? We always looked after grandma, and this is the expectation that we should have. So there's no hard and fast rules. Migratory experience, 4 kind of broad areas there, that if somebody has dementia, what does change in location create? So it might be an alien environment. You might revert back to your language. What does that do in terms of ending up in care, or you've got particular care workers that are coming into the home? Experiences of racism will have an impact. And again, this most important one really is about trying to bust this one-size-fits-all approach, that if we did this, it's okay for the minority communities. So we need to kind of think about embedding it within person-centred approaches. Impact on services, of course, the thing is, whether it's about taking beds in hospital, whether it's taking carers out of, the system, if people are not going to be economically active, you're not paying taxes, you're not putting back into the system. But what about the impact on people who become carers, and more carers that will have, if their mental health and physical health has been impacted on, we're going to have more and more poorly people, so we need to kind of think about the cost of the economy there as well. I'm not really going to go into details about the others because there's also lots of information about there, things like assessment, are they culturally appropriate? And I'm sure that, if you were to ask my mum about, Winston Churchill, she wouldn't have a clue. But if I was asking you here about, either Gandhi's name or the sister of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who's the founder of Pakistan, or what's the, where's the Pakistan monument, things like that, most of us here wouldn't know either. So sometimes it's about our culture and our knowledge, and so our assessments need to be appropriate as well. So I just kind of wanted to take you through a bit of a quick journey, this sort of trajectory of dementia in any kind of given community, but particularly if it's South Asian, what might it look like? And that would start from somebody thinking that, is this person deliberately, misbehaving, the symptoms, the behaviours that they're showing, is it deliberate? Are they deliberately sort of say that, where are my keys? You need to give me my lunch, I haven't had my lunch. Which then moves on to, as dementia kind of becomes a bit more obvious, even if though you haven't got a label for it. But the notion of respect in many minority communities is very different. So rather than saying remain active and we need to keep you mentally active, it's, if you can dress well, you sit there, you get your food, TV's on, you're kind of not really active, but that's a kind of notion of respect. Which then moves on to stigma. So as you're kind of accepting what's happening, you're worried about what family might say, what neighbours might say, and that's going to have an impact on whether you will access services. And so on, kind of going through that journey, whether you think of witchcraft and possession by spirits and jinns, so will you go to the imam, will you go to the health services? And as you're needing more and more care, then what you'll realise there is that it's obviously inappropriate. People want care at home, they want services don't exist, or they're not culturally appropriate. So people tend to become more and more isolated. I know you can't read that. There's a list of references there, so in case anybody wants to access that, that is there. And finally, really, to say thank you, but there is, I don't know whether you can see the reference point there. The document is available and in German, French and English. But this is just a bit of a taster, really, to say that, we're all of a ethnic culture. And if we tend to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes, then we're more likely to think about person-centred approaches. But I'd also sort of ask that where the person-centred approaches might need to be family-centred, so that we're looking at who are the decision makers, what's the impact on the different genders within communities. And thank you for listening.